The global power shift from the west to the east has really begun. The east has a plan, they have a long-term vision. The west and many countries like the UK seem to have lost the plot. One example of this is the Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI as it's called. This is China's grand plan to link up over 150 countries, 3/4 of the nations in the world, through its road and maritime links. And some of them are former silk routes, ancient former silk routes, and boost trade in the area. It's I would say a multi-trillion-dollar investment, and it started back in as early as 2012, and maybe it was even on the plans before then. It's seen as Ping's big legacy, if you like, his master plan for China. But they're actually building it, they're linking countries. I'm in Malaysia at the moment, and I can see a lot of things happening. I look around, I see cranes in the sky, I see development going on, I see links to China happening. The Chinese president visiting countries like Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, which are on their borders, their neighbours, if you like, because they're not just looking at Southeast Asia, they're looking at Central Asia, they're looking at links with the Middle East. They've got a big, bold plan. And as I said, they're building it. They're not talking about it for decades. Unfortunately, in the UK, we talk about things for it seems like ages. Just things like building a new runway for Heathrow Airport. This is a road, a piece of road that is 1.5 miles long. They've been talking about this expansion of London's Heathrow for 30, 40 years. I think since the time the Beatles were around. This is before Take That and Taylor Swift and Coldplay were probably even born. That's how long we've been talking about this bloody runway, and they're still talking about it today. The last government were going to shelve it, and then they were going to do it, and then now this government said we're going to do it. We're going to cut through all the red tape and planning objections and that sort of thing. Now look, I'm not suggesting we go towards the Chinese Communist Party's technique for public consultation on planning, and just like we're going to just bulldoze your village and build a new station here. But there's got to be some middle ground. If you look at Heathrow compared to, say, Schiphol in a smaller country, if you like, in Netherlands, they've expanded Schiphol. I don't like the airport, but at least you're in the same building when you walk 2 miles to the next connecting flight. You're not having to change terminals and get a bus from Terminal 4 to 5, and etc. And that's why they've become a big hub. They're actually, you can see things going on in Asia. It's incredible. Road links and rail links across countries like Laos and Cambodia. Most people probably don't even know these countries. They probably couldn't show them on the map. We know about Cambodia from the Vietnam War and Laos and these sort of countries. And if you go to Cambodia, it's very poor, but you can see stuff going on there. You can see that China's is entrenched there. They're doing stuff there. They're helping the country. Of course, they're doing it for their own benefit. Of course, they are hoping to sell their Chinese electric vehicles, their cars, their machinery, their equipment, their rail, and skills in building, anything from power stations to rail links. And you think about China when, you go back to the days of, say, Richard Nixon, when he went to China, and I think he might have met Chairman Mao. It was a poor country. People were starving there. They were riding around on bikes. There were millions of push bikes in Beijing, and then it's not that long ago that they were sort of a developing country. Now look at them. They can do everything that the West can do, and sometimes better. Look at this AI company that has sent shudders through Silicon Valley because they've been able to develop AI at a far cheaper cost than the companies like Nvidia. So trade is now exploding across Southeast Asia with China, and these rail links allow. One example I saw in a documentary here was that farmers selling fruits and vegetables, stuff like durian fruit, this big fruit that goes off pretty quickly. Now before, farmers in, say, Thailand could not send that stuff to China without the expensive cost of flying it in because it would rot on the way. Now they can get it from the farm to the tables of the consumers in just 6 days, because there's now a rail link going right across from these countries straight through, Laos and Cambodia into China, and they're doing very well from that. That's just one small example, but you look at car manufacturing. China in Malaysia here, they took over a company called Proton, which made good cars, but got into trouble back in 2010, that sort of era. They were not making very good cars. A bit like the story of British Leyland, that the cars were not very good. The government had to keep bailing them out and putting more money in. And then this Chinese company, Gilles, came in and took over the company and have completely turned it around, transformed it. Now you look around, there are lots of people driving good Proton cars. This company also owns Volvo, so you've got an X70 sort of Proton version of the Volvo X70, and Proton had previously bought Lotus, the UK sports company, the famous Lotus company. So things are happening here, and they've got huge car plants here building the latest cars. And that's just one country, but you can see the buzz here. You can see a lot of, you walk around, you see a lot of young, fit, educated people. Many of the people here speak at least 2, 3, and even 4 languages. And of course, you've got the Chinese Malaysians that speak Cantonese and even Mandarin as well. So you can see how that can blend together and help trade with China. I also saw a documentary about Iran. Many Iranians are learning Chinese. Where do you think they see their future with? Do you think they see it with America and Britain? No, they see their future as partnering up with China. And of course, you've got this organization called the Confucius Institute that is there to promote Chinese language, Chinese culture, a bit like the British Council, which doesn't receive enough funding from short-sighted governments. They've even closed down part of it. Even the BBC World Service struggles to keep going because of cuts. So, but China's the opposite. They're doing completely the opposite. They're expanding their influence around the world, their soft powers, and as well as their hard powers in showing their military might, but also in actually putting their money where their mouth is and building stuff that helps to develop. Because you've got to build the roads, the rail links, the ports. And I put a map up here. You can see the map of the road links and then the ports where they're link into Singapore, Malaysia, and many other countries that will help the sea routes as well to develop the trade. Of course, I know this is benefiting China, but they've gone out and done it. So these countries are looking now to China. I think 70% of Malaysians would prefer to be linked with China than America, because of course you've got Trump there talking about tariffs and threatening these countries, weaponizing the dollar, weaponizing their power, and saying, we want 50% tariffs and 40% tariffs. I mean, I agree with Trump in many ways that, you can't just export jobs to the East like Britain has done, like America has done, and just leave our manufacturing and just give them those jobs. I agree with that, but the way he's gone about it, I think, is a bit cack-handed. He's gone in, with a sledgehammer to crack a nut. This could have been negotiated in a different way. The art of the deal style of negotiation doesn't always work in world diplomacy, and it's scared a lot of countries, to be honest. So, and I don't agree with exporting jobs either. I mean, the banks here are controlling all our money here, and they're exporting the back office jobs to the Philippines and India and the Far East and South Africa. And okay, I personally think it's wrong, because they're making vast profits in the UK, but then giving the jobs away. So where does that end? If they all do that, where are they going to get their business in the UK? They're just going to move the operations somewhere else. It's just bonkers. And that's just one part of it. Hundreds of thousands of jobs have gone. Millions of manufacturing jobs have gone. So I agree with Trump in a way, but you've got to go around it in a different way. So these countries are, now linking up with China, and not to mention BRICS, and that's another story. I've done articles on BRICS before. The Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These are now not just 4 or 5 countries. These are 30, 40 countries that are linking together to combat this weaponization of the dollar. And it hasn't helped that Britain and the UK have seized assets of of Russian businessmen that are nothing to do with the government, and they've just seized their assets, just taken their money like some third world junta. So that worries countries. So they want to be able to trade outside this dollar and the SWIFT system, and they are doing it. They're going about it in a big way. The Chinese overtook the US as Africa's largest trading partner, not recently, in 2009. And look what they're doing in Africa. Look what they're doing to capture the rare earth minerals in those countries. And look, there's been some problems with some of their investments in Africa. I know that a lot of the money they put into it has gone into African leaders' back pockets, and disappeared. And there are problems, but they're going ahead with it. They're pursuing this. And as far as I can see, the West, which is Europe and America, Britain especially, have been asleep at the wheel since when? Like since the Second World War, as I can see. For decades, they've been asleep at the wheel, and they've allowed China to come in and run rings around. They've just overtaken them. And you look at the UK had previous strong links with African nations. These nations were under the British rule at one time, and many of them were given independence after the Second World War in the 50s. I think Ghana was one of them. They were given independence the same year as Malaysia. And I look at Malaysia, and it's a first world country. Look at Singapore, how they've developed in those years. And yes, they've had the links through the Commonwealth of countries. But wheeling out the Queen or the King every few years to go around waving to the subjects, oh yes, very good. That's not enough. They're not looking for that. They're looking for real investment and job links. Even going back a few years, there were British train and British railways and British trains in many parts of Africa, and we stopped supplying the spare parts. We stopped supplying that sort of equipment because we shut down our manufacturing. And so where are they going to go? These crumbling trains are now being replaced by, guess what, Chinese trains. So where are they looking to their future for? They're not looking to Britain anymore. In fact, many of these countries resent the fact that Britain have not really done much to support them from the days of independence. Now that's another argument, but I'm sure that Britain, with its links, could have done more to promote, and France the same as well, to promote growth and trade within those countries. Those countries would have previously driven British cars. Now what are they driving? Japanese, Chinese cars, and so on. And then we look at because, as I said, China's running rings around us, literally. And unlike Western democracies, who can only plan ahead for the next election. I mean, in America, they're planning for the midterm election in a couple of years. Then 4 years, it's all over for Trump, and he can't go back in again. So he's got to make an instant impact, hasn't he? Keir Starmer, I mean, my God, I don't know where to start on Keir Starmer and the Labour government. They would be lucky to survive the next election, but that's all they're thinking about. Let's get money and do something now. And it's just crazy. Whereas China, the Chinese Communist Party, doesn't have to worry about elections. I'm not promoting it. I'm not saying we go down the communist route, by the way. So don't say I want to be like China. But at least one of their advantages is they can really have a long-term vision. They can think, 50 years ahead. And they do have 50-year plans, not 5-year plans, but 50-year plans. And they have this long-term vision and strategy. Then we look at the Middle East. Look what's happening in the Middle East. Not just Dubai, but countries like Dubai, Qatar, the Emirate countries, Saudi Arabia. They're all embarking on massive multi-billion and even trillion-dollar projects to reinvest their oil wealth into infrastructure, tourism, business centres, and all sorts of things. And they are now attracting the brightest and the best. The entrepreneurs, the engineers, the scientists, the IT techie people. And what are Britain doing? They're just taxing them out of existence. I speak to many people who are doing very well in the UK, lawyers, high earners, and higher rate taxpayers, and they're just fed up with it. So, well, half my income or more is gone, and then I lose out on this, I lose out on that. What's the point? And then you try and send your children to private schools. What do? They tax you 20% VAT on parents sending their children to private school. It's all a political ideology of Labour to say, let's level down, not level up, level down. Let's drag all the private schools out of business. And these are not, I'm not talking about the Eatons and the Harrows and the Winchesters. I'm talking about small independent schools that won't be able to survive, losing maybe even 5 or 6 pupils. they can't survive. They're on, they're on a knife edge already. So if parents start pulling their children out of there, a lot of them won't survive. And independent schools are already closing down, and they can turn their buildings into flats, I guess. And those children now have to go back into the state system, where it costs taxpayers at least $5,000 a year to educate those children, where they were out of the system, been educated by the parents. The parents were paying for this, but now they want to tax them. What are they going to tax next? Are they going to say, well, we'll tax people who have private medical care? So if you go into a private hospital, you've got to pay an extra tax on that because you should use the state system and wait 2 years for an operation. It is just bonkers. And you look at countries like Dubai, a lot of British millionaires and very wealthy multimillionaires and young entrepreneurs are going to these countries. They're being incentivized in those countries and other countries, well, not just Dubai, but some of the European countries like Portugal are incentivizing people to go there, not taxing them out of existence. It's just bonkers. I can't see what is going on. It leaves me in despair. China and many other Southeast Asian countries, Middle East, have a plan. They've got a plan. It's the New World Order. What do you think? I mean, BRICS, let's not even talk about BRICS, but they are. This is a New World Order. But what is the UK's plan? Just tell me, you can put it in the comments. What is the UK plan? As far as I can see, tax and spend our money. Just tax and spend. They've already started on this. Tax and spend our savings. Tax and spend our pensions. Rachel Reeves right now is doing a Gordon Brown. Look up Gordon Brown and what he did to pensions when he was in power. Gormless Gordon Brown, I call him. He did a $5 billion tax rate on pensions. Rachel Reeves is doing the same thing. And when he left office, he bankrupted Britain. There was a note left by the Treasury Minister, Liam Byrne. He used to be an immigration minister. He left this little funny note saying, good luck to his successor. Good luck. There's no money left in the Treasury. We're broke. And Cameron used that in his election campaign to win the next election, to win back for the Tories. But that's what happened under Gordon Gormless Brown. He bankrupted Britain. And Rachel Reeves, this is a serious point. I should do a special episode on this. She wants to raid the pension schemes because they've run out of money. They've borrowed all they can. Their plans are in tatters. They didn't really have a proper plan. And now, in order to give a boost to the public sector and give all their unionised labour more money and pursue their ridiculous net zero plans, they're going to have to raid pensions. What they're doing, they're trying to force pension schemes to invest only in Britain and invest more of their money into riskier ventures. And the pension industry are pushing back on this because they're saying, well, hold on, we've got a fiduciary duty to protect our pension funds, so we have to invest it wisely. And they've been doing this for hundreds of years quite happily until the government interferes with them. So that's happening. Taxing ISAs. I mean, Rachel Reeves, we talked about this before the last budget, that she had a plan to reduce the allowance for the tax-free ISA you can put in currently $20,000 a year. She wants to take away the deposit element that you can put this money on deposit, and so you can only invest if you're investing in stocks and shares, and then reduce the tax-free allowance down to $4,000. In other words, an 80% cut in the tax-free allowance on savers. And many people don't understand the stock market, so many people will not understand how to invest their money in stocks and shares. They won't understand the risk and reward. So you've got to learn about this. You can't just force people into this. So what else are they doing? Taxing businesses. Corporation tax rates, our national insurance rates are already driving companies away. Taxing jobs. Yes, the new national insurance hike on jobs has meant that many companies are no longer hiring. They're laying people off. What are they doing? Exporting jobs. It's just bonkers. You couldn't make it up. Taxing landlords, putting more red tape on landlords, forcing landlords to say, well, hold on a second, I'm out, let's get out of here. And there's talk of other taxes, maybe further taxes on landlords, just because they call it unearned income. Who knows? I mean, there was a time under the Labour government under Harold Wilson when tax rates went up to, I think it was 83%, something. Come up with the figure. Certainly that for the highest rate of tax on what they called unearned income. So you earn the income, you pay tax, you invest in it, and when you're getting the income on the investment, they call it unearned income. It's such a left-wing horrible phrase. These taxes could go up for landlords. And at that time, you had a brain drain in the 60s and 70s when taxes went so high that businesses left, professionals left, scientists, doctors, groups, and musicians had to leave the country because they were going bankrupt. So that's happening now. Taxing motorists, all these sort of stealth taxes on us, more cameras in the street, giving us fines if we go over 20 miles an hour, even 21, 22 miles an hour. I've had 3 fines when I had nothing for years and years and years, maybe 20 years, the last sort of points on my license. Suddenly I got 3 at once because these cameras have been tweaked to such a level that you just go slightly over, you're done. And it's all about tax. It's all about tax. And local authorities now are putting up council tax as well. So, let's talk about tax. Taxing, as I said, people who send their children to private schools. What next? What are they going to think of next? I just don't know. But certainly it's not going to be a long-term vision. And believe you me, the government are coming after your money, my money, your money. And they've already started blowing the money. They've borrowed billions. They can't afford to fund their fantasy schemes. So they're coming after our money. I think the currency has been devalued. We're looking into the digital currency coming in. We've had a consultation on this, even under the last government a few years ago, and I reported this. There was a public consultation on this. So it's coming. The plan's coming. It's coming not just in the UK, but these countries under the G7, these organisations, these faceless organisations with 3 letters in their title, the W, blah, blah, blah. I see that Christine Lagarde, who is the chair of the ECB, European Central Bank, is probably going to take over the job of Klaus Schwab as head. So it's like the same kind of crowd, the same cabal of people moving around, isn't it? I hope I don't get blocked for saying this, but these plans have come from there, and of course what they do by saying let's just replace the currency, they're doing a currency reset, if you like, because every few years, every 50 years or so, currencies sort of run out of steam. They've debased the currency so much that they have to then replace it with something. We looked at the Harold Wilson government. He devalued the pound in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, I think, maybe late 60s. And he had a famous speech where he came on TV with his pipe and said, "This will not affect the pound in your pocket." How can he say that? What a liar. Does he think that people are stupid? Well, in those days, people didn't really know. They thought, well, I can go and spend my pound down in Sainsbury's. It doesn't matter unless I go on holiday to Spain. But it does matter. Of course it matters. It's you've seen a decline in Britain since that time, since the Second World War. And before the Second World War, we had an empire. We were something in Britain. We built things. We built cars. We built ships. We built machines and manufacturing. It's all gone. It's not all gone, I wouldn't say. We still manufacture things in the UK, but a lot of the heavy industry is gone. Steel plants, I'm not sure we got a steel plant anymore. Most of them are gone, and the government has no long-term vision. I'm sorry this is a bit of a rant, but this is all true. And where is the growth coming from? Where do we see the growth coming from? All they seem to talk about is green energy jobs. Do me a favour, Ed Miliband. Ed Miliband couldn't run a market stall. I just think the guy is a complete buffoon. He's got this ideology that probably comes from his father, the communist father that he had, and he's just, I just can't believe he's even in government. He's even a minister, and he's driving this country into ruin with these ridiculous green energy plans and net zero plans. We're all paying for it. We're all paying for it in our taxes. We're all paying for it on our electricity bills. We've got some of the highest electricity bills in the world, and that is also affecting, of course, manufacturing industries. How can they manufacture when they can go across the water and get cheaper electricity and do it there and pay lower corporation tax? So I can't see, looking at it in the business point of view, I can't see where this growth is coming from. I just don't see it, unfortunately, and especially when business entrepreneurs and smart people are leaving the UK because of the tax. Educated professionals are leaving the UK. Our doctors, our top lawyers, accountants and nurses, people like that are leaving the UK, and we're struggling. And who's coming in? We're bringing in people in boats and that sort of thing that are coming in that are not going to be productive. Maybe in 5-10 years' time they will be productive, but in the meantime, the UK taxpayer is going to have to house them, put them in hotels or houses, feed them 3 times a day until such time as they can get on their feet. Even when they get refugee status, they're probably going to be on benefits and probably be on benefits for years to come. Maybe that it's only their children who will end up being net productive in terms of the amount they produce as the amount they take out of the country. But clearly, if you've got families coming in with 2 or 3 children and they're not working, each of those children costs $5,000 a year to educate. They need medical care, and even if they work in a job and work and earn a small amount of money, they're not really paying for themselves, if you see what I mean. So in other words, our brightest and best are leaving, and the people coming in are not the brightest and best. In fact, the immigration system doesn't really encourage it anymore. And yet they're allowing people to come in that are not going to be productive for years. And then you look at the business side, what growth. Have any of the top ministers, has Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, Ed Miliband, and all that mob, have any of them actually run a large company, run a business? I don't think they've even run a market stall. I wouldn't trust them with a market stall. They just wouldn't know how to turn a pound and make it turn a buck, you know. So they've all, in my opinion, lost the plot. Okay, so what can you do? Well, I know it sounds all doom and gloom here, but there is a way out of this. As Warren Buffett said, financial education is the key to building wealth, to storing wealth, to looking after your wealth, and it's basically the stuff they don't teach you in school. So my advice is learn how to build and protect your wealth, how to build wealth and build and protect wealth. Learn how to manage your money. Don't squander it. You know, when I was a financial advisor, I could see people who were going to be broke. They were squandering their money. They're out just buying stuff. They're borrowing money to buy stuff. They're running up credit card bills to buy big TVs. And another saying from Warren Buffett, the rich have big libraries, the poor have big TVs. And it's true. When you walked into a house where people were well off, you'd see books around the place. You walked into a place where they were broke and perhaps on benefits even. They had the biggest TVs you could imagine. It covered the whole walls. They had speakers there, and and they were just watching TV all day. And what does that do to their brains? What does it do to their kids' brains? I'm afraid not. You look at kids nowadays. A lot of them are leaving the state system, unable to read or write. And I look here in the Far East, and I can see educated people speaking 3 and 4 languages. So you've got to learn these things. You've got to learn how to invest in assets rather than losing money by lending it to the banks. Yeah, when you put your money in the bank, you're depositing it. But if you look at the terms and conditions, you are lending that money to the bank. They can then lend it out and make money on it. They can lend out something like 80% of that money. I think they only have to keep 4% in reserves. The rest of it can be lent out. So in other words, if everyone went to the bank tomorrow and asked for their money back, you wouldn't get it back. The banks would just collapse. The government would have to step in. And people think their money is safe in the bank, but is it? Is it really safe? I mean, they've got this so-called government guarantee of $85,000 per banking group, but if your money's all in one bank, you're only covered for $85,000 anyway. And do you really think the government could bail out all the banks if it happened? I don't think so. In 2023, a lot of banks went under, including some large American banks, Silicon Valley Bank, for instance, and they managed to contain it. But how are they going to keep containing it? What usually happens when a bank goes insolvent, another bank will take it over. But when that can't happen anymore, then what happens? A lot of people think, well, the government's going to step in and do a Northern Rock situation, bail them out. But that's not going to happen anymore. There's now called a bail-in. You might end up with, instead of getting your money back, you might end up with shares in the bank which has gone bust, and you might have to wait years before you can recoup your funds. Look what happened in Cyprus. Just look up Cyprus and how they stole people's money in Cyprus. So you've got to learn about these. You've got to learn how to invest in assets rather than thinking that you're going to save your way to retirement. You can't save it. When I say save, I mean save your money in a bank or a deposit. It's just not going to happen. The returns in the deposit funds have always been lower than inflation. And we know that the official inflation figures of 3.5% is all cobblers anyway. We know it's not true. We know that inflation's been running at more than 10%. And that's per annum, so that's cumulative. So we know that since before the lockdown and the Ukraine war, I think a lot of stuff has doubled in price. Stuff in the shops. We know for shoppers. Talk to anyone who goes down the shops and looks at prices. We know things have gone up. So your money's been losing value every year by 4 or 5%, and over years that means it's going to halve in value over, say, 10, 12 years, it will halve in value. So you've got to learn how to invest in assets. What are assets? You learn all these things. Learn about invisible taxes like inflation, which are eating up your savings. Assets, stocks and shares, property. Learn about gold and silver. That gold is and silver the only real money. That used to be the makeup of the coins before they debased them. This is go back to Roman times, but even in recent times, we've taken away the link between the paper money, the fiat currency, and the gold which backed it up. That no longer exists. The paper money now is just a promise. It's just a promissory note, really. So learn about these things. And I'm not saying you can learn about it overnight. I do run a course. I run a smart money course. I'll put up a link to that. You can have a look at that. But I do teach you about how to manage your money, how to save and invest, and the difference between saving and investing. I look at what assets you need to be in and how to track and keep a track of your income over time. So I teach you all about this, starting with getting control of your money from day one. And that's in my Smart Money course. You'll learn about assets and learn how to protect your assets from the clutches of the governments and the people that would like to take your money away from you. So good luck with that. I'm sorry it's been a long rant here, but I'm really angry about what the successive governments, and this government in particular, are doing to our great country. There's a lot of talent in the UK. There's a lot of brains. There's a lot of people that can invent things, and many of the world's inventions were invented in the UK, but unfortunately we fail to capitalise on it. But there are a lot of very, very smart people in the UK, and there's still startup businesses trying to get going in the UK. It's still a good place for startup businesses, but when they get a bit bigger, they then have to go elsewhere to raise more capital, and that's very sad. So I do have some hope for the country. And hopefully this government will not be in power for too much longer, and we can get back to some form of normality. But in the meantime, you've got to row your own boat, learn how to manage your money, and keep your head above water and build real wealth for the future. Thanks very much for listening. Bye for now. Check out the link for my Smart Money course.